Welcome back to Palestine Bookshelf. I'm Stephen Heiner, and today we're going to be discussing the UN High Commissioner's report on the attacks on hospitals during the escalation of hostilities in Gaza. This takes us from October 7th, 2023 to 30th of June, 2024. And as often happens when I deal with these reports, I'm simply going to be reading from them without too much commentary because what I have to read is pretty shocking in and of itself, and I don't think I can add substantially to what's being said. There'll be a link in the description to a place where you can read this report for yourself. And there'll also be a link in the description as well as a card for the documentary Gaza Doctor Under Attack. A substantial portion of that documentary was based on the claims made in this report and the further investigation that went along with it. And you'll get to meet some of the people talked about in this report. This report presents grave concerns regarding attacks on hospitals, as well as operations within them and in their vicinity in Gaza, covering the period 7 October 2023 to 30 June 2024. In the context of the ongoing escalation of hostilities in Gaza, the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights has since early October 2023 documented repeated attacks on hospitals and operations within and in the vicinity of hospitals, leading to sustained combat in and around many hospitals. This pattern has led to the destruction of most hospitals in Gaza, pushing the healthcare system to the point of almost complete collapse. Attacks on hospitals were reported in each of the areas in which the Israeli military conducted ground operations, starting in November 2023 with an attack on Al-Shifa Medical Complex and other hospitals in Gaza City. At the end of June 2024, 22 out of 38 hospitals across Gaza had been rendered non-functional, according to the Ministry of Health of the State of Palestine. In gathering, assessing, and verifying the information contained in this report, and drawing conclusions based on international human rights law and international humanitarian law, OHCHR applied its standard methodology. The monitoring and verification of violations remained extremely challenging, including owing to access constraints, a high level of insecurity, and threats and direct attacks also on United Nations personnel, monitors, and humanitarian actors. Nevertheless, verification work continued, and information was gathered from multiple independent sources, including victims and witnesses, military and weapons experts, open sources, including satellite imagery, videos and photos, credible organizations and individuals, official and other documentation. The healthcare system in Gaza was grossly inadequate even before 7 October 2023. The 17-year blockade of Gaza in the context of Israel's 57-year occupation, combined with the destruction caused by repeated escalations of hostilities since 2008, during which Israeli forces regularly bombed Gaza, has created broad dependence on external aid and heavily restricted access and movement of people and goods in and out of Gaza, including those essential for healthcare. This created the conditions for endemic shortcomings in healthcare provision and recurring violations of Palestinians' human rights in Gaza, including their rights to life and health. If you want to know more about those repeated incursions into Gaza during that time period, I'll put links to both Gaza in Crisis by Noam Chomsky and Ilan Pappé, as well as Norm Finkelstein's famous book on Gaza, An Inquest into Its Martyrdom. Links in the description as well as cards. The situation has deteriorated to a catastrophic level since October 2023, as this already damaged health system has been targeted, resulting in the killing of hundreds of health and medical professionals. This report sets out patterns in the conduct of hostilities in relation to attacks on hospitals and in their vicinities, examining several cases where OHCHR has closely monitored. The attacks on hospitals often followed a similar pattern, involving missile strikes on hospital buildings, the destruction of hospital facilities, shooting of civilians, sieges, as well as temporarily taking over hospital buildings. The present report does not examine in detail the many cases of arbitrary detention, enforced disappearance, and ill treatment of medical personnel and other Palestinians, including internally displaced persons, IDPs, taken into custody from inside hospitals, which has been reported on elsewhere. It is clear, however, that these losses of qualified personnel have contributed to the collapse of the healthcare system. We're going to see that term referred to again. I just want to clarify. IDPs A DP is a displaced person, which almost everyone in Gaza, except the natives of Gaza who were there before 48, are already displaced persons. They were ethnically cleansed from their villages in 48. IDP means these people were already displaced, and they're displaced from wherever they were displaced from. So let's say they were in Han Yunis or they were in Gaza City, and the bombing caused them to be further displaced. And a lot of these IDPs, as the report refers to them, would shelter in hospitals. The impacts of the Israeli military's occupations in and around hospitals that led, in many instances, to combat in these areas have been significant, extending far beyond the physical structures. It has resulted in the loss of access to essential life-saving treatment, loss of access to safe spaces, including desperately needed shelters, and loss of care for chronic illnesses, turning non-life-threatening conditions into potentially fatal ones. The destruction of Gaza's healthcare system, along with Israel's restriction on the entry and distribution of medical supplies, has led to the drastic deterioration of health outcomes across the entire population and a health catastrophe, with the spread of infectious diseases including polio, hepatitis A, acute diarrhea, and jaundice. This has caused significant suffering among the population, and thousands of Palestinian civilians have resultantly died and will continue to die until the health system is rebuilt. OHCHR monitoring has found that the Israeli Defense Forces operations on, within, and around hospitals generally followed a pattern with often catastrophic impacts on the functionality of the hospitals and on the lives of those reliant on its services, as well as on those who have lost their homes and were sheltering inside. The IDF's operations against hospitals generally started with A. Airstrikes or shelling on the hospitals and or in the hospital's vicinity, often resulting in serious damage to the hospital's premises and equipment. B. Besieging the hospitals with ground troops, preventing Palestinians from accessing the hospital and blocking medical supplies. C. Raiding the hospital with the assistance of heavy machinery, including tanks and bulldozers. D. Detaining medical staff, patients, and their companions, as well as the IDPs sheltering inside the hospital. E. Forcing remaining patients, IDPs, and others to leave the hospital. And finally, F. Withdrawing troops from the hospital, leaving in their wake severe damage to the structures, buildings, and equipment inside, effectively rendering the hospital non-functional. The Israel military's first major operation against the hospital was directed at Al-Shifa Medical Hospital in Al-Ramal area of Gaza City in early November 2023, when around 50,000 IDPs were reportedly sheltering there. And people will remember this from fairly early on in this stage of violence, because Israel had claimed that it was a Hamas headquarters, there was a bunch of tunnels underneath, there was a Hamas headquarters underneath the hospital, and of course, no proof to this day in 2025 has ever been produced of that. Strikes and other attacks in the vicinity and grounds of the hospital between 3 and 17 November resulted in the killing of at least 25 Palestinians, including 3 medical workers, and caused extensive damage and destruction, including to the intensive care unit, cardiology section, the hospital's magnetic resonance imaging, MRI device, solar panels, water tanks, wells, and oxygen pipelines. I'm sure that was all accidental, of course. The IDF reportedly encircled Al-Shifa Medical Complex on 14 November, controlling the vicinity of the hospital and severely restricting freedom of movement for civilians and staffs, inside and out, by directing live fire at all movement in and around the hospital. The IDF then raided and operated from inside the hospital the following day. On 18 November, the IDF forced approximately 5,000 Palestinians to evacuate the hospital, including IDPs, sick and injured persons, and medical staff. On 24 November, IDF troops withdrew from the area, leaving the medical complex almost completely non-functional. Between 27 October and 24 November, IDF released more than 27 statements, alleging that there were extensive tunnels under the hospital used by Al-Qassam brigades of Hamas, and that the hospital was the main headquarters for Hamas terrorist activity. In January 2024, IDF released 2 videos of tunnels allegedly under the hospital and another displaying some weapons found in an MRI room in Al-Shifa. The IDF asserted that Al-Shifa hosted Hamas's command and control center or headquarters, and stated that they found a room with technological assets along with military and combat equipment used by the Hamas terrorist organization. The IDF also shared the profile of 5 individuals who they claimed were terror operatives taken into custody in Al-Shifa, OHCHR has been unable to independently verify these assertions. What about the common sense of, if this was Hamas's command and control center and you destroyed it in November 2023, how is it that you were unable to defeat Hamas and you had to have the Americans push you into a ceasefire in October of 2025? In a broader military operation in North Gaza between November and December 2023, during which many Palestinians were killed and injured, 3 hospitals, Kamal Adwan Hospital, the Indonesian Hospital, and Al-Auda Hospital, in close proximity to each other, came under attack by the IDF. In the case of Al-Auda Hospital, between 28 October and 8 December, several IDF strikes on the hospital and its vicinity were reported, with the hospital's facilities and several nearby buildings destroyed or damaged. According to OHCHR monitoring, on 5 December, the IDF besieged Al-Auda Hospital with tanks and troops, while approximately 250 persons, including around 100 staff and 40 patients, as well as an unknown number of IDPs and patient companions, were still inside. On 17 December, the IDF raided the hospital and detained the hospital's director, before returning the next day and detaining other hospital staff, including Dr. Adnan Al-Bursh. Dr. Bursh was pronounced dead while still in Israeli custody in April 2024. The hospital director remained in detention as at the end of this reporting period. Satellite images captured between 9 and 20 December 2023 revealed earth berms erected to hinder movement to and from the hospital and to provide cover from fire and to engage in fire, roadblocks, and military activities around the hospital, effectively preventing anyone from accessing the medical facility. The siege, during which the facility faced shortages of medicine and food, with an inevitable impact on healthcare provision, continued until 22 December. Despite IDF's military operation and raid on Al-Auda prison, the IDF made no allegations of hostile activity from Al-Auda Hospital. Let that sink in. They didn't even try to make up something like they did with Al-Shifa. Didn't make any claims. We're just attacking a hospital, which is a war crime. The impact of the attacks on these hospitals remains significant, as all 3 hospitals were still only partially functional by June 2024, largely due to the extensive damage caused by the IDF's operations and the subsequent restrictions on the delivery of equipment necessary for their full operation. And you can pull up a map to look at this, but I'm pretty certain Al-Shifa, the Indonesian hospital, and Auda are all north, pretty close to Gaza City. So this is in the north of Gaza, if you want to situate yourself as to what we're talking about. And obviously this was part of the spearhead of the attack. This was the easiest place for the IDF to penetrate. Following the partial reopening of Al-Shifa Medical Complex, the IDF raided it for the second time between 18 March and 1 April 2024, leaving it and its vicinity in complete ruin. On 18 March at 03:59 hours, the IDF announced an ongoing military operation in Al-Shifa Medical Complex, claiming that the operation was based on intelligence indicating the use of the hospital by senior Hamas terrorists. At the time of the raid, patients and IDPs were sheltering in the facility, reportedly numbering 7,000. Between 18 March and 1 April, when the IDF was at Al-Shifa Medical Complex, almost incessant IDF strikes and shelling on residential buildings were recorded in the vicinity of the hospital, killing many Palestinians, including women and children. OHCHR verified at least 22 deaths in the vicinity, 9 children, 7 women, and 6 men. During this period, ground battles between the IDF and Palestinian armed troops were also reported in the area. IDF troops appear to have entered and operated from within the hospital by 20 March at the latest, when the IDF chief of staff visited the site. The second raid on Al-Shifa Medical Complex deprived patients of medicine, food, and water, as well as oxygen, due to the halting of the electricity supply. According to the Palestinian Ministry of Health, at least 5 patients died in the hospital during the raid. Subsequent to the IDF's withdrawal, 3 mass graves were reportedly found at the hospital, with at least 80 corpses retrieved, raising serious concerns that crimes under international law may have been committed. This is a UN report, so they have to have this very measured language, but anyone reading this may have been committed. And here's the next line. Some bodies were reportedly found with catheters and cannulas still attached, suggesting they had been patients in the hospital. Imagine thinking you are a big, bad Israeli soldier, or people supporting the big bad Israeli soldiers, and you murder people with catheters attached to them, patients at a hospital, you bury them in a mass grave. This is what you have to be proud of. These are the heroes. These are your gods, O Israel. There were also reports that tens of corpses found inside the complex were patients, including from the intensive care unit, and others who died due to the worsening conditions caused by lack of necessary medical treatment. At least 3 medical doctors who were inside Al-Shifa Medical Complex at the time of the raid were reportedly killed in the vicinity of the hospital after the IDF forced them to leave, raising further concerns that the Israeli military failed to meet the conditions applicable under international law to evacuations, including ensuring that evacuations were safe for displaced civilians. To the extent compelled evacuations do not meet these conditions, they are unlawful and may amount to acts of forced displacement, including forcible transfer, prohibited under international law. If you are finding this content valuable, consider hitting like, subscribe, sharing this with other people who want to hear about observers, non-Israelis, non-Palestinians reporting on what they saw during this time period. In all instances where the Israeli military has attacked hospitals, apart from Al-Auda Hospital in northern Gaza and Al-Aqsa Martyrs Hospital in Deir al-Balah in middle Gaza, Israel has alleged that the hospitals were being used by Palestinian armed groups. In its comments on this report, the government of Israel makes these arguments specifically in reference to Rantizi, Sheikh Hamad, Al-Quds, Indonesia, and Nasser hospitals. However, insufficient information has so far been made publicly available to substantiate these allegations, which have remained vague and broad, and in some cases appear contradicted by publicly available information. Of all the Israeli attacks on hospitals in Gaza, the Israeli military gave the most information on their grounds for attack in relation to their attacks on Al-Shifa Medical Complex, repeatedly alleging its hostile use. Between 27 October and 24 November, the IDF released more than 27 statements claiming that Al-Shifa Hospital was the main headquarters for Hamas's terrorist activity and that Hamas operated command and control centers inside the hospital and that they directed rocket attacks and commanded forces from there. The Israeli military stated that Hamas was holding hostages in the hospital, was using the hospital's ambulances for transport, was stealing fuel from the hospital, was preventing the hospital from receiving fuel provided by the IDF, and that Hamas was using people inside the hospital as human shields. The IDF stated that they had received this information through intercepted phone calls and sources within the Gazan healthcare system. The IDF also asserted that during interrogations, Palestinians had said that members of the de facto authorities were using the hospital as a base of operations, without clarifying whether this referred to Al-Qassam or civilian members of Hamas. According to the government of Israel, I mean, anytime you say something like this, you know lies are coming, right? According to the government of Israel, in November 2023, the IDF issued a specific warning to cease all military activities in the Al-Shifa hospital, and states that it discovered extensive Al-Qassam tunnels and infrastructure under and in the hospital. However, the IDF has not released sufficient evidence to enable independent verification of these claims, and in some cases, statements from the IDF have not been supported by information as subsequently released, which is a very polite way of the United Nations saying Israel is lying. For example, before the operation between 3 and 24 November on Al-Shifa Hospital, the IDF published animations and infographics claiming to show extensive tunnels and other infrastructure under the hospital as justification for the operation, which that's fine, you can make up a bunch of graphics. But the 2 videos it released in January 2024 did not confirm these statements and instead showed much more limited tunnels in the grounds and vicinity of the hospital. What a huge surprise. If you've been watching this channel for a while, you know that that is not a huge surprise. On 21 November 2023, at around 1300 hours, a projectile reportedly hit the 3rd and 4th floors of the northern facade of the reconstructive surgery building of Médecins Sans Frontières at Al-Auda Hospital in Jabalia, North Gaza. The building is situated approximately 270 meters southwest of the Indonesian hospital. This incident resulted in the killing of 3 doctors, including 2 Médecins Sans Frontières staff members and 1 patient's companion. 3 additional hospital staff, including 2 nurses, sustained injuries. The strike also caused significant structural damage to the affected floors, with the munition likely entering through the windows on the northern facade of the building. An assessment by OHCHR military experts of the damage and IDF's positions in the area suggests that the strike was most likely the result of IDF artillery shelling. Despite the extensive damage and destruction caused to Al-Auda Hospital and its vicinity during the presence of IDF troops around the hospital, the IDF has not provided any comment regarding the 21 November incident, nor is OHCHR aware of the IDF having made any allegations that Al-Auda Hospital was being used by Palestinian armed groups for military purposes. This raises serious concerns that Al-Auda Hospital was struck by the IDF in violation of international humanitarian law, including the principle of distinction between civilian objects and military objectives. Now, I think it's interesting here that the UN doesn't footnote this by saying we have numerous instances of Israeli governmental ministers saying that there are no innocents in Gaza, that there are all combatants, that there is no distinction between civilian objects and military objectives. No mention, obviously, we would not expect this in a human rights report, but the Dahiyya Doctrine, a well-known doctrine of destroying everything in the area without any regard for whether they're combatants or civilians. This was developed in Lebanon back in the 80s, and this is still a doctrine within the IDF. OHCHR verified multiple instances of death due to gunfire at Al-Auda Hospital in Jabalia in December 2023. The shootings restricted movement within the hospital's buildings for an extended period and caused casualties among medical staff. On 7 December, for example, a volunteer nurse in the hospital was fatally shot in the chest while looking out of a window. On 9 December, an Auda staff member was shot in the head and killed while standing near a window. Médecins Sans Frontières confirmed the injury of a doctor on 11 December, stating that he was an MSF surgeon shot during the IDF's siege of the hospital. On 21 December, another hospital worker was fatally shot in the head while she was moving between 2 buildings inside the hospital premises. OHCHR also received allegations that 2 women at late stages in their pregnancies were shot and killed in separate incidents on 6 and 8 December 2023 while on their way to the hospital to deliver. They were approximately 20 meters from the hospital when shot. I just want to pause again here. Imagine you are a big, bad Israeli sniper and you shoot nurses who are standing by windows, and you shoot pregnant women going to deliver their children. These are the heroes on which Israel builds its so-called democracy. These are their heroes. People who shoot pregnant women, people who shoot nurses at windows, unarmed women. These are the cowards that build Israel's so-called democracy. In none of the incidents described above was there information to suggest that the victims were directly participating in hostilities. Yeah, I can't imagine a pregnant woman on her way to deliver her baby, but she wanted to make sure she got a few shots off at the IDF before she got in there. Based on all the information collected, including the fact that during this period the Israeli military had surrounded and besieged the hospital and was dominating the hospital's environs, OHCHR has reasonable grounds to believe that the repeated use of live ammunition between 5 and 22 December came from the IDF troops surrounding the hospital. You think? I mean, who else would it be? But remember, we're supposedly probably Hamas. Hamas was probably shooting at the hospital. Couldn't have been the Israelis. In its comments to this report, the government of Israel stated, once again, remember, government of Israel stated, here come some lies, but these are the most egregious lies I've read for this entire review. So just sit down for a minute. If you haven't already been sitting down, just sit down for a moment, okay? The government of Israel stated that during its operations, the IDF had taken extensive measures to mitigate civilian harm and minimize disruption to medical services. These included, it stated, enabling evacuation routes from hospitals, providing medical equipment, fuel, and other humanitarian aid to ensure hospitals' continuing functioning and the well-being of patients, staff, and individuals sheltering there, and establishing field hospitals to bolster Gaza's medical system. These people want us to believe that Israel took careful care to make sure no civilians were harmed, that hospitals continued to function, and that patients, staff, and individual sheltering there had well-being. These are the lies defended by people like Charlie Kirk. And if you want to hear my take on Charlie Kirk and his legacy of the defending of genocide, not only of a people, but particularly of innocent children, I did an X space on this a couple weeks ago. I'll put a link in the description. This is who would defend these sorts of things and just believe whatever Israel said. They would believe it, and then they would find ways to then tell this to the public. But these are all lies. We would have to disbelieve our own eyes. We look at the videos seeing that there's no regard for civilians. There's no regard for medical workers. There's no regard for internally displaced persons. All these people are being targeted. Nurses being shot at windows, pregnant women being shot on their way in to deliver babies. These are the careful steps that Israel takes. The bombing of the World Kitchen, the Jose Andres group, even though they had said, here are our cars, here's our marking, they were all killed as well. But we're supposed to believe that Israel takes care. We know that the opposite is true. Every accusation is a confession. So if they say that they are doing these things, what we know is the opposite. They're making sure that none of these things matter. And in fact, the opposite is true. We are going to target medical personnel. And that was the point of the Doctors Under Attack documentary I cited at the beginning of this review. It's one thing to bomb a building. It's another thing to kill a doctor. It doesn't take 7 years to rebuild a building, but it takes many years to rebuild a doctor, in a sense. If you destroy the human medical infrastructure, that's even more harmful than destroying a hospital. And there was a clear directive given from the beginning of this operation, because it started in November of 2023. We need to destroy the hospitals and we need to take out the healthcare workers. This is something that they've done even more so than we've seen in Cast Lead or Protective Edge or Summer Rains. Any of the operations we've seen before, we have not seen this level of coordination around hospitals and medical staff, which means this is a new part of the Israeli playbook, an escalation that we haven't seen before, and it has to be noted. Attacks on hospitals in Gaza have also had serious implications for patients with initially non-fatal conditions, potentially rendering them fatal. Women, especially pregnant women, are suffering gravely. Many women are giving birth with no or minimal pre- and postnatal care, increasing the risk of preventable maternal and child mortality. According to the United Nations Population Fund, as of February 2024, midwives were delivering over 70 babies a day under dire conditions with insufficient medical equipment. OHCHR has received reports that a number of newborns died because their mothers were unable to attend postnatal checkups or reach medical facilities to give birth. Attacks on hospitals have deterred many women and girls from seeking necessary care due to fears and increased risks. People with chronic diseases requiring recurring treatments such as kidney failure, hypertension, diabetes, and heart diseases also lost access to their treatment, placing them at risk of worsening health outcomes and death. At least 1,100 patients of kidney failure, for example, were reportedly facing death because of a lack of dialysis treatment. Cancer patients, who had been estimated to number 10,000 in Gaza, have similarly lost access to critical treatment. Israel, as the occupying power, is obligated under international humanitarian law to ensure and maintain the provision of medical services and public health and hygiene to the fullest extent of the means available to it, and to take preventative measures necessary to combat the spread of contagious diseases and epidemics. These obligations must be implemented to the fullest extent by Israel, considering in particular the increased presence of its troops in Gaza and the dismantling of the local authorities' capacity to provide services to the population. Under international humanitarian law, Israel is further obligated to ensure items such as medical supplies and food for the population of Gaza, again to the fullest extent of the means available to it. If the resources of the occupied territory are inadequate, Israel must bring in the necessary medical supplies and other necessary articles. Furthermore, if any of the population is inadequately supplied, it must agree to relief schemes, including by humanitarian organizations, and facilitate them by all the means at its disposal. Additional concerns over the violation of these obligations arise from 1. The attacks on hospitals, including the strikes on hospital buildings, medical transport, and medical personnel. 2. The systematic siege of hospitals and the subsequent cutting off of access to those in need of healthcare and the isolating of medical personnel, patients, and IDPs inside. 3. The prevention of entry of medical supplies and other essential items into hospitals. And 4. The subsequent evacuation of hospitals while failing to provide alternative medical care or ensure access to other necessities of life. Under certain circumstances, the deliberate destruction of healthcare facilities may amount to a form of collective punishment in breach of international humanitarian law, which would also constitute a war crime. Does anyone doubt that that's what we've been seeing in front of us over and over and over? In many different contexts, this report has solely been focused on the hospitals. But we know that there's been many other war crimes committed by the so-called most moral army in the world. Under international humanitarian rights law, attacks on hospitals implicate an array of violations, including the rights to highest standards of health, food, water, and ultimately the right to life. Israel's international human rights law obligations apply in Gaza by virtue of the power and control it exercises over territory and people and the enjoyment of their rights in Gaza, particularly further to its status as an occupying power. This includes the obligation to refrain from interfering with or raising obstacles to the enjoyment of human rights. It also includes immediate obligations to secure the minimum core of certain rights, such as the right to highest standards of health, food, and water. International human rights law requires that Israel fulfills, through provision of the necessary goods and services, the human rights of individuals to whom it owes obligations in situations where they are unable to realize their right themselves for reasons beyond their control. Intentionally directing attacks against hospitals and places where the sick and wounded are collected, provided they are not military objectives. Intentionally directing attacks against the civilian population as such, or against individual civilians not taking direct part in hostilities, including the launching of an indiscriminate attack resulting in death or injuries to civilians, and intentionally launching disproportionate attacks, all are war crimes. Utilizing the presence of a civilian or other protected person to render certain points, areas, or military forces immune from military operations is also a war crime. Several of these acts, if committed as part of a widespread or systematic attack directed against the civilian population, further to a state, or, in case of non-state actor, organizational policy, may also amount to crimes against humanity. These include intentional acts resulting in the death of civilians, including medical staff, in violation of international humanitarian law, in the context of the attacks on hospitals, and arbitrary blocking of the delivery to civilians of food and medical and other supplies essential to life. Okay, so if you are still here at the end of that catalog of horrors, please comment UN in the comments and let me know what you appreciated about this, what you think I could have improved in my delivery. And remember, there's a link in the description so you can go and read this for yourself. I read significant portions of the report to you, but I'm hoping that will encourage you to go and investigate this and other reports for yourself. If you'd like to get this to more people, an easy way to do that and a free way to do that is by hitting like or subscribe. Share this with other people who want to hear from a non-Palestinian or non-Israeli source as to what has been happening in Gaza in the last 2 years. If you want to thank me for this presentation, there's links to Buy Me a Coffee and PayPal. If you want to participate in the channel on an ongoing basis, be part of the community, get access to early releases, videos like this one, as well as exclusive Q&As, one-on-ones that I do with paying members. There's Patreon and YouTube membership. They're available for people to take a look at, as well as Substack. Substack's been great lately. And actually, all throughout the process, I should give more of a shout out to Substack. If you'd like to nominate a book for the future, you'll find an Amazon wish list below. You can click on there. You'll see books from other genres as well, but obviously all the Palestinian books, all the books about the Palestinian issue are there for this channel. You can buy that book, send it my way, and I will do my best to review it in a timely manner. Remember that when the channel gets monetized and or we become profitable as a project, hasn't happened yet, but we're trying to get there. Thank you for the support of everyone who has donated so far. When we get to that level of profitability, any profitability, 100% of our proceeds will go to the Palestine Children's Relief Fund. There's a link to them in the description at pcrf.net. They're a medical charity that helps Palestinian children get medical care who could not otherwise get it. And they're worthy of your support. Feel free to support them directly and support them indirectly by watching as much as you can the videos on this channel, as well as sharing it with other people who you think could also profit and share as well. Until next time, enjoy your reading.